comes on, and then we're ready to go. Oh, there we are. Alrighty, good. Oh, that's loud. Good morning, everyone. So it's a pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Nathan Grills to talk to you today. Nathan is from the Nossal Institute of Global Health, and hopefully you've looked in the timetable and you realise he's going to be talking to you about public health approaches to smoking. So we'll just get Nathan going, and I'll have to run away, I'm afraid. I'll have to listen to this online, like most of the class. Alrighty, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. I know this is a pretty stressful time for most of you. You've probably got exams coming up. You're thinking about applications to medicine, GAMSATs, etc. So I thought I'd try and convince a lot of you to not be obsessed about getting into medicine, because there's two. This is my background is more the public health approach, and I think you can make a much bigger difference. But on the surface of it, doesn't always seem the case. I think the biomedical individual approach, which I'll be talking a bit about in contrast to a public health approach, is often more attractive. You get to treat patients. People often get better. They thank you. People think you're a god often, which is a bit conceding. The community respects you, and the government even pays you well. Compared to public health, a job in public health and a population health approach, no one knows who you are. If you make an impact, no one thanks you because they don't know who it is. People don't know what you do. What is epidemiology? I don't really know what that is. You pay people to do research rather than them paying you, and your value is judged on papers and getting through the peer review process. Doesn't sound very exciting or very attractive, but I'd say it's a much more useful use of your life. So here's my reasons. And tobacco control is a classic example of this, why a population health approach is better than an individual biomedical approach. I know you're doing biomedical science, but so I won't tear apart all your background, but I think public health has a lot to offer as a career. You get a chance to save millions of lives. You have some serious fun while doing it. You can travel the world in global health. I spend a lot of my time on planes and going to exotic locations. You get to fight and expose groups like Big Tobacco, which, is exciting. It can lead to death threats and that sort of thing as well, but in terms of making an impact, it's exciting. It's an excuse for larrikinism. Who's heard of the Bugger Up campaign? No, probably before most of your time. It was basically graffitiing billboards that were advertising tobacco. It was done mostly by public health doctors. So they call it the Bugger Up campaign, billboard utilising graffitiists against unhealthy promotions. There's some very fun examples of that. I think a few people got put in jail, but that's not, they got out of jail and now they're famous for their standing up against the big tobacco. There's a lot of creative mass media campaigns, which a lot of you would have seen, I guess, in terms of trying to influence public opinions around tobacco. And you get to influence policy and politicians, and that ultimately you save more lives. So I should ask for a raise of hands, who's hoping to get into medicine? Is that a dangerous question to ask? Probably most of you. Come on, be honest. Okay. Who wants to go into public health? Oh, wow, there's a few. Great. There's a few converted already. All right, we'll see how we go. We'll ask the question again at the end and see if we've changed any of your opinions. So today, just going through the learning objectives today, I want to understand the impact of tobacco use in Australia and around the world, to understand what approaches have worked in tobacco control. I think most of you are probably a recipient of very good tobacco control in that you're not exposed to it here like I was as a kid. To understand the difference between an individual approach versus a population-level approach. And probably a lot of what you've done so far in the biomed, even this subject, has been around the individual approach. And I think looking at the last few lectures you had them, was it on COPD and looking at lungs, histology and pathology, and if that's exciting for you, great, but this is even more exciting. So it's the other side of addressing the problem of lung disease, largely. And to explore what we can learn from tobacco control for other public health campaigns. So ones, I guess, that are relevant now, alcohol, food and gambling. What can we learn from how successful tobacco control has been? So how big is the problem of tobacco usage and tobacco impact? Worldwide, about 5 million people die annually. Tobacco killed about 100 million people last century. but it's going to kill a lot more people in the coming century. How many people are estimated to be killed by tobacco in the 21st century? Any guesses? 100 million last century? Need some prizes. Anyone? No guesses? It's about 1 billion it's estimated to kill because of the dramatic increase in tobacco usage rates, particularly in India, China, Indonesia. So if you compare, we get a lot of attention on terrorism, but the fact that every hour, A380 equivalent gets killed by tobacco, about 500 people an hour by tobacco, and no one really cares about it. The perspective of the huge impact that tobacco plays, yet with little attention on some of these public health issues. So it's the second biggest preventable risk factor in the world. What's the biggest preventable risk factor? Hypertension is. So it causes 90% of COPD, which I think you studied last few weeks, and lung cancer. But what does tobacco kill most of its victims from? It's not lung cancer or COPD. Anyone have a guess? Yeah, great. So cardiovascular disease. So cardiovascular disease is far more common than lung cancer. So even though the relative increased risk of death if you use tobacco is smaller than, say, lung cancer, because it's far more widely spread across the population, far more people die from the tobacco impact on your cardiovascular system. Production of cigarettes is massive, 743 cigarettes per person per year. It's from Industry Has This Bragg data site, and that production and sales have increased despite pretty effective tobacco control in many countries. There's about 1 billion daily smokers currently, and 33% of all men smoke. So it's largely a male epidemic, especially in places like Indonesia, India, China, the bigger countries where people are smoking now. It tends to be more of a male epidemic. I think you know the dangers of tobacco. You probably watched them on TV, either in primary school, whatever. But it's about 4,000 chemicals, 51 of them are known carcinogens, so pretty toxic product. I still find it amazing that you can buy that over the counter, a product that kills 1/3 to a half of all people that use it 15 years prematurely. I don't know how they manage to sell that over the counter. This just gives a bit of a breakdown of where where tobacco causes death. 6 of the leading 8 risk factors of death, tobacco is a large contributor to. You can see there on the your far left, right, is the combined risk, and that's about the 5 million people a year deaths. This is the breakdown across, so obviously ischemic heart disease has the bigger, well, COPD there has a bigger number. Probably because they're combining cerebrovascular and ischemic heart disease, yeah. But you can see the huge impact right across all those diseases. Apart from HIV and diarrhoea, everything else has significant. Up a little bit? Sure. Okay, I'll keep on going there. Is that better? I'll try and speak more into the microphone. So why the upswing in Australia in the 1950s? You can see it there through 1940s, through the first part of last century. It was actually quite a low usage of cigarette consumption in Australia. The 1940s, 1950s, you see this massive spike and upswing in the use of tobacco. So while the epidemic started in the 1950s, these are some of the background reasons, which we'll go through and how to respond to them. But advertising and branding of the behaviour, it became widely advertised. We'll just go through some examples later on of sexy images of people smoking, of the Marlboro Man. A whole lot of advertising images that became quite iconic around tobacco use. The production methods and delivery systems became far more sophisticated, and the ability to mass-produce cigarettes at very low costs became possible, as with Pepsi and Coke. Likewise, you've seen those products available universally around the world. Same with cigarettes. They're universally available around the world. And Benson hedges were very effective early on at looking across the whole world market and being able to get their product right to the consumer and the user at every possible location. The cost availability has become much cheaper and much more available, as I just said. Cultural shifts in the 1950s and peer behaviours became very popular, even amongst women as well, to be smoking. It was seen as culturally appropriate. Even in the 1930s, about 70% of men smoked. So you can see that a lot of people were already smoking, and then when you add the addictive power of tobacco, it's highly addictive, and you have a lot of people smoking, and then you have increased availability, decreased cost, and increased access. You can see what led to that massive upspike. Basically, the main reason I would say was probably big tobacco. In the tobacco control movement, our whole life is spent fighting these guys. They don't really care about the health of the people that we care about. So this is big tobacco there saying, sorry, but your health may be hazardous to our profits. Yeah, I don't know how you could... Personally, I can never work with a big tobacco firm, despite how much I get paid, whatever you got paid, because the huge amount of death and destruction that you cause, but big tobacco doesn't seem to be too worried about that. But tobacco control has been probably the biggest health success story of the public health movement, and I think you're all beneficiaries of that. The tobacco control movement in Australia has saved about 500,000 lives. In America, it's about 8 million lives, and I'll show a graph later on that illustrates that. In terms of the world response, it was the first global health treaty. It was the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which about 180 countries have signed up to, which means that the countries are obliged to implement a whole lot of restrictions on tobacco use and sale, both to limit demand and limit supply. So, yeah, it's been a very effective treaty. In Victoria, we led the way internationally. It was the Victorian Tobacco Act in 1987, which had a whole lot of different aspects to it, but basically it banned advertising in a lot of sporting events, and it used government money that was saved to sponsor for sporting teams. So it was a huge political, I guess, exercise to get both sides of politics on board to get it through Parliament. It required a lot of lobbying of health ministers. The health minister, I think his father had died of tobacco usage, so there's a lot of personal investment. One of those things you think, how did it possibly go through back then? But Victoria led the world in that, and the world now has come on board. And you can see the smoking prevalence in Australia followed after that. That was 1987. You can see the dramatic increase from 91, when I was a teenager, to when you were teenagers. It's almost halved. So from 29.5%, it's down to about 12.8% now in 2016. So a very dramatic decrease in use. If you map the decrease in use with the different interventions, you can actually, if you do some complex modelling, you can pretty much map that when a large intervention happens, like the National Tobacco Control Campaign, you get a subsequent decrease in the prevalence. And if you map it out, you can actually attribute it to particular interventions that cause this decrease in prevalence of tobacco use. Most recently, the plain packaging legislation and the increased tax rises as well. They've been shown to be quite effective in decreasing tobacco use. So what works in tobacco-related death and destruction, in limiting tobacco-related death and destruction? So if you ask different people, you'll get different answers, basically. The tobacco industry has a lot of its fake news, I guess you would call it, or fake research they love putting up there or focusing on different things. So that's a great example of this. Like, yeah, if excellent health statistics, smokers are less likely to die of age-related illness, which is true because you die a lot younger. It's a way you bend, and the tobacco industry has bent research for their own means right through the last 100 years and denied that it had any harm, denied it was addictive, a whole lot of things that they've been able to pay people to do research on to prove their point. Research in inverted commas. So the WHO approach to tobacco control is called Empower. I'll go through what the MPOWER means, but the O is there, offer help, cessation and counselling. So how effective is that at limiting the tobacco impact? Well, yeah, show of hands, is it effective or highly effective or medium? So who's for highly effective? Is cessation and counselling highly effective? Just me, out one. Is it medium effective? Yeah, quite a few. Is it not effective? Yeah, so it's probably between not effective and medium in its effect. It can be effective for some people, but going cold turkey is far more effective. But it does increase your chance of successfully quitting by about... If 6 people tried to quit, 1 of them would be helped, basically. The other 5 would not be helped by cessation counselling. Treatment of tobacco-related illnesses, is that effective at addressing the epidemic? Highly effective, medium effective, not effective? Yeah, it's not effective because obviously you can see it doesn't get to the root cause of the problem, and that's what the industry would have you focus on. So that's what I've tried in the past to sponsor hospitals and health programs. Filters, light cigarettes, low tar, low nicotine. Does that help fight the epidemic? We'll start with highly effective. Who thinks it's highly effective? No. Medium effective? Yep. And not effective? Yeah. Probably some of those are not effective, like low tar, light cigarettes, and because people tend to inhale more and breathe more deeply, so they get the same dose. Low nicotine filters have a role, so medium to not effective. But again, the cigarette companies use that to advertise, have in the past. Oh, our product's safe, but of course it still kills half the people that use it, so not very safe. So it's a way they've used to advertise their product. Nicotine replacement therapies, highly effective, somewhat effective, yeah, not effective, couple, yeah. They're probably somewhat effective, again, for a certain group of people. Medications, again, they're for a smaller group, they're quite expensive, and they can be effective, but not for everybody. And it depends who you ask, yes. If you ask the tobacco industry, they'd say all those things above are effective, so it doesn't really impact on their bottom line. This is what really works, and we'll go through these now in the Victorian or Australian context. So raising the real tobacco price is very effective. Enforcing bans on advertising, marketing of cigarettes is effective. That's the R and the E of empower. Mass media campaigns, so warning people about the dangers, is very effective, especially in, say, low-middle income countries like India. That's low-hanging fruit. Although largely in India, people with low awareness about the dangers, whereas here, I think most of you would know the dangers of tobacco. You've grown up with advertisements. Smoke-free policies, again, we'll go through some of those, but that's like banning smoking in public places is very effective at protecting. So being very effective, and if you look at the price as the first and probably the most important policy driver, not just in tobacco, but whether it be alcohol, other products you want to try and decrease the sale of. If you increase the price, you decrease the sale of these items quite significantly. So that's in America, but as you can see, it pretty much is inversely follows the price, the sales. The sales will come down as the price goes up, basically. What does it cost for a pack of cigarettes in Australia now? Find who's a smoker now. No one knows, no one smokes, that's great. I think it's about $20 now, is it? $20 a pack, $25 a pack, I think. It'll go up to about $40 a pack by 2022. So you see, at low income levels, it's much more effective. At a low income level, if you increase the price of a pack by $1, you decrease the smoking rate by about 2 to 3%. If you're in a high income bracket, it doesn't really affect you that much. But the majority of smokers in Australia are low middle income. So you can see it's very effective. If your disposable income is low, when you've got to pay $30 a day for a pack of cigarettes, you can imagine that if the price increases, you will be more likely to decrease. So it's very elastic. It's price elastic is the term they use. So yeah, Australia was going up to $40 by 2020, so maybe about $25, $30 now. There's a lot of opposition from the tobacco companies saying it's a regressive tax. It does affect poor people more. As I just said before, more people who are poor smoke. So if you tax cigarettes, then more people who are poor pay the tax. I would say it's actually it's pro-poor, decreases the inequality amongst the poor and the rich in smoking rates. So for instance, in Indigenous communities, you've got rates that are about double, and that probably explains up to about 70% of the health inequities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities is the smoking rates so much higher. So it's a pro-poor policy because it improves the health of the poor more that it improves the health of the rich, but they will pay more taxes. And there's always a complaint from the tobacco companies that their product will become unaffordable. And I say that's great. That's what we're aiming for. Hopefully, tobacco will become unaffordable. We've come a long way in terms of advertising. This is before my time and your time. So doctors were actually used to advertise cigarettes in the 1940s and 50s. A lot of doctors smoked. I think it was 25, 30%. That's one example. In Australia, there's been an incremental progressive campaign. So started with TV advertising, 1970s, and then billboards, print advertising was banned. So banning billboards, banning print advertising. So the Bugger Up campaign was quite effective, and they were able to, in the late 1980s, they were able to advocate to remove advertising on billboards, and that was part of the Victorian Tobacco Act. So tobacco sponsorship of sports. I grew up on sports and cricket, and I know all about Benson and Hedges, and I'm not sure if people probably here a bit younger than me, but you probably wouldn't have seen a lot of tobacco advertising in sport. Who's seen tobacco advertising in sport here? Anyone? Only one, because you're from from another country? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and so there's not many in Australia would have seen any tobacco in advertising in sport. Point of sale advertising in the early 2000s, you may have seen that. Now it's all behind that shutter. And that was late 2000s. We stopped the cigarette display packs displayed behind the counter. The Plain Packaging Act was in 2012. I was quite involved in that process, so now they can't use the pack to advertise. Basically, that was the last domain they could actually use to advertise was the cigarette pack, which is quite effective because the smoker brings it out of their pocket 30, 40 times a day, and everyone can see it. So it was quite an effective way of showing the product brand. The evidence shows that you cannot make partial restrictions on advertising because tobacco companies will find a way of advertising their product. This Camel one was in the Australian Grand Prix, had an exception on advertising tobacco. I was thinking some of you might have seen advertising of tobacco on, if you watch Grand Prix, Formula One. It's still allowed in some places. Australia, it's banned. So when the cars come here, they have to take all the brands off the cars. But they were still tricky. They keep all the same colours and the same patterns and everything. So you could tell it was Camel, even though the actual name was removed. So at the time, we were trying to prevent that happening, prevent them using the colours to advertise. So it's been quite effective, I think. This will be my test about how effective advertising bans have been and plain packaging. I'll start on your left there. What brand is that? He's been exposed to advertising somewhere else. Which country was it? Pakistan. Okay. So I'm glad most people wouldn't know that. Next one, the blue one in the middle. Yeah, Winnie Blues, Winfield, yep. You a bit older or in your pocket there? European, yep. And the one on the far left there, the far right? Marlboro. See, well, you know Marlboro. Why is that? Anyone answer why you know Marlboro? The car driving? Race car, yeah, Formula One driving, yeah. So that's great. I think my kids will grow up knowing none of those brands. I knew all of them from advertising as a kid. So plain packaging is a bit about plain packaging since the most recent intervention. It's been effective. A really trivial proportion of people take up tobacco use after the age of 23. So most of you are at that age, around that age. So if you haven't started smoking now, it's unlikely you're going to take up this habit later on. So the importance of the youth market to tobacco companies lies, this is a quote from a tobacco company, lies in their lifetime value of getting kids to start using a highly addictive product as early as possible and perhaps smoking for 30 or 40 years. That's what the tobacco company is aiming for. If we get them smoking young and it's an addictive product, we get 30 or 40, 50 years out of this consumer until we kill them. So the intent of plain packaging is to cause all future generations of kids to grow up never seeing highly toxic and carcinogenic tobacco products packed in a designer box, but instead in plain packaging with unforgettable health warnings, which we've probably achieved. That's a quote from Simon Chapman. Watch this little clip, which gives you a good example of how effective it can be for kids.
I like this one because it's got red, and red is my favourite colour.
It reminds me of a Ferrari.
It stands out from the crowd, like funky, sort of, the design. It looks kind of like the sun, all that light coming from one single place. This is quite fancy. There's a programme I've watched called Tintin, and it's got a symbol like that in one of the films. Is that a royal sign? It might be posh writing. Yeah, it looks quite posh. It's really bright colours, and then I think it would be quite fun to play with because, like, it just makes you almost happy by looking at it. I think this one looks actually quite pretty. Yeah, pink, pink, pink. It looks girly, I just like it.
The pictures actually look quite nice. I mean, ice cubes and mint. It makes you feel like you're in a wonderland of happiness.
That one's cool. That one's cool. That one's cool. That one?
Yeah, that was cool.
There was an ad from the UK. They've just gone ahead with plain packaging, so all those tobacco packs were available in the UK until last year, but now they're all plain, and they're more like what Tony Chapman has aimed for there, that they have unforgettable health warnings and they aren't attractive to kids in designer packs. So plain packaging has been the end of advertising for tobacco, big tobacco in Australia, and they fought very hard. As you might remember, some of these campaigns, they tried to prevent plain packaging happening. They knew it was the death knell for any advertising they could do in Australia. Who's seen a tobacco advert in any form in the last month? Anyone? Maybe Formula One again? Or maybe, no? Anyone? I don't think I have. If you're online, maybe you have, but no. Okay, so it's pretty much we've removed, or the public health community or the government has removed any tobacco advertising from Australia. So it's meant to reduce the appeal of products, increase the noticeability of that pack health warning. It's obviously far more noticeable without the colours, and reduce the ability of the retailers to mislead consumers. This is one in India. We're going ahead with the same thing. A lot of my work's in India now. The colours in India, when you do focus groups, people don't like the grey. So it's the grey pack that India will hopefully go ahead with in the near future. But India is a lot more complicated because you've got a lot of chewed forms of tobacco, so you've got to make plain packaging for chewed forms, beedies, which is the sort of leaf-rolled ones, and the cigarettes. The mass media campaigns, number 3, has been the third part of the offensive against tobacco. I think all of you would have seen ads. There's been a drop-off in the ads in Australia. There's a lot of push now to say we should be having more advertising against tobacco use. I don't watch a lot of TV. Is there currently ads on TV that are anti-tobacco? Occasionally, not much. Okay. So these are ones that you may have seen over the last 20, 25 years. They're pretty graphic and pretty effective. And Australia has been in the forefront of leading the development of these campaigns, and ours have been used all around the world. Could ask you to choose your favourite one. I'm not sure if you have a favourite. I'll come back to that. But systematic reviews find that mass media campaigns reduce smoking uptake amongst youth, increase the quitting amongst adults, and reduce prevalence. And they're highly cost effective, even though they cost a lot to produce and to put on screen. They're highly cost effective in terms of the dollars they save. Indirect effects by increasing discussion also, and setting the agenda for policy change. So if it's in the public eye and you're a government and you want to introduce a new legislation against tobacco, then if it's in the public eye, people are more likely to be supportive. So every cigarette is doing you harm is probably a slogan you know from our very effective mass media campaigns. So, it's associated with a decline in adult smoking rates. If you look at the research and you map it out and you model it, you can actually break it down and say the mass media campaigns, when they're on TV, lead to increased calls to quit lines and lead to lower rates, lower prevalence of smoking. What's your favourite ad? I've got lots of favourite ads. I've got a whole CD of all the ads in the whole history of Australia's anti-tobacco campaign. It makes for interesting watching, but they are highly effective. This is my favourite. Well, this is my least favourite one, I think. I didn't used to have an impact on me until I got
Just the makeup.
If this is how your child feels after losing you for a minute, just imagine if they lost you for life.
Pretty impacting. I didn't used to find it impacting when I've got a 5-year-old now. Now I watch it and I almost cry. So maybe if I'm not sure where you guys are at family stage-wise, but it's probably very effective at 20, at late 20s age when you've got young kids. They banned that one in the US. They used the same one, but the US wouldn't allow it because it was too impacting. People found it too distressing. This is the whole point of the ad. I mean, you can imagine if you had lost the kid for some other reason, you can imagine it'd be extra distressing. So Australia went ahead with it. It was a very highly effective ad. Who found that impacting? Majority of you? Yeah, probably, okay. It wasn't just the age, my age. So the fourth area is smoke-free policies. So this has been what we've been working on largely in the last 10, 15 years, and you'd have seen those changes yourselves. I guess you would have been too young for nightclubs when there was smoking in nightclubs. I wasn't when I was at uni. You go to a nightclub and you come out stinking of smoke. You couldn't talk when you got out because of the smoke on your larynx, and it was horrible. Now, if you go to nightclubs, you wouldn't see so much any smoke inside, I wouldn't have thought. If you did, report it to me and I'll get them looked at by the government. So the strength of the smoke-free policies are they rely on the justification that you're injuring someone else's health. So a lot of the libertarian movement would say, well, it's my right to smoke, I want to kill myself, that's my choice, get off my back. But they can't say that if you're saying, well, you're injuring someone else's child or someone else is suffering because of your smoking. That's a much easier argument to make. So workplaces typically were full of tobacco use in the military, very high uses. They used to be given out as rations right through First and Second World War. You got cigarette rations and you traded in cigarette rations. I was in the military in 1995, 4, 5, 6. And likewise, in the Navy, you would go out and smoke. The back of the ship, that's what you did in all your breaks. You'd go out and smoke. I used to go out, even back then, I used to go out and try and convince my friends to quit. That was my role. But I wasn't even a medical person then, but I've always hated tobacco. There's far more casualties from tobacco than bullets in all those major wars, which is an interesting fact no one knows. Travel, planes and trains. When we used to go overseas as a kid, we used to, you get on trains and planes, you would get totally sick with the tobacco smoke. Now, if you saw someone smoking on a plane, I think you'd probably get your plastic knife and try and stab them. It's just like, it's so unacceptable. It's just how public attitudes have changed in a couple of decades. Pubs, clubs, hospitals, they're probably, some of you remember those changes. Prisons is more recent, it was a couple of years ago, which I think you remember the riots that broke out when prisoners couldn't get access to smoke. University of Melbourne, I'm sure you're all rioting as well when that came into being 2 years ago. Most of you were here, I guess, 2 years ago. So do you remember that campaign to wipe out smoking at the university? Yeah. Do you still see people smoking at the university on campus? You do? Okay. And you go and talk to them, obviously, and say, you can't smoke. They hit you in the head and then no, it's not. So we were involved in that University of Melbourne campaign and researching what people thought about it. It was largely supported by most of the student body and most of the smokers themselves. I found interesting. Most of the smokers were okay with it. They thought it was not good that they were smoking on campus anyway. They didn't mind another prompt to help them quit. So we published that research a couple of years ago. But now, it's gone ahead with very little opposition from the student movement. There was anticipated there might be a big outcry from the union and this is against student rights, etc. But there's been very little backlash. I mean, it shows where we are in our community in terms of attitudes towards tobacco and probably the smoking prevalence. If you tried that 15, 20 years ago in a student body, there'd have been riots, I think, in Australia. How dare you take away our right to smoke? But things have changed so dramatically in that last 30 years. The last sort of resorts in terms of where people go to smoke, beaches and parks. There's a number of beaches and parks. It is banned because of the kids, and that's largely in council-based policy, not a national or a state policy. I should go back, I shouldn't get quoted here, but probably the impact of smoking in those areas on other people is minimal. As you can imagine, an outdoor place, it's very unlikely to damage a child's life or an adult's life or impose on somebody else. It is more a approach to tobacco control which just denormalises it so much that you don't see it and people don't want to do it anymore, so it makes it increasingly uncool. But as far as protecting other people, I don't know, you could argue on a beach that the tobacco smoke of a smoker is going to actually damage your health. Probably not. Outdoor eating areas, Australia's been very slow in this. Victoria's very progressive in most areas, not outdoor eating places. So I think it comes into force, is it this next month, or anyone noticed? Already in force? Last few months ago? Yeah. Right, I've been out of the country, I work in India. So what's happened? Have you noticed no one's smoking in the outdoor eating areas now? Is that? Just walk a metre away, so they're just beside the outdoor eating. Yep, okay, great. I need to open my eyes. Thank you. Interestingly, what people, when my visitors from India come here, they'll say, oh, everyone smokes here, it's really high rates. If you walk down the street now, you see everyone on the street smoking because they come out of the buildings, filter down, outside, can't be in the eating areas, and the impacts on the streets, smoking. So it seems like we have a lot of smokers here, but it's because we made them very visible. So that's great. Yeah, so Victoria's moved on at last with the outdoor eating bans. But in India, places like India, they've banned smoking in public places since 2008, despite having massively high rates and very ineffective other policies. Some areas they've been quite progressive. That's what I was saying before. A graph demonstrates the deaths averted due to COPD, CHD, cardiovascular disease, and bronchitis, lung cancer. You can see just graphically how much deaths would have happened if there wasn't tobacco control. So the 9 sets of voluntary global targets at a global level to respond to non-communicable diseases. Tobacco is one of those, to decrease consumption by 30%. The big challenge remains in India, China, Indonesia, where rates are still increasing in places like Indonesia, massively high. India, amongst men, it's about, it's regional, but across the whole country, it's 35-40% of men smoke. And we've got 1 billion people, that's a lot of smokers. This is an ad I saw at an airport a few weeks ago in Australia. Nobody smokes here anymore. And I thought, it's pretty effective, isn't it? Like, it's sort of like, it's not saying don't smoke. It says nobody smokes here anymore. You're an idiot. Why would you even want to smoke? It's just making it so socially unacceptable or abnormal that it's like, get with it. So endgame, this is sort of towards endgame policies. How can we stamp out smoking completely? There is a whole lot of policy approaches to this. Basically, they say endgame is when it gets to about 2 to 5% prevalence of smoking. It's denormalised so much that it's basically the end game or the end of the tobacco epidemic. So basically, what it requires is more of the same, denormalising, making tobacco unaffordable, banning the advertising, the same things we've already been doing. It's more of those, and removing all opportunities for advertising, which we've done pretty much in Australia. Or have we? This is in the UK, where it has been illegal to advertise tobacco for 30 years, but these ads on your right is actually a current ad. So it's back in the form of electronic cigarettes, which are an interesting case. But you can see, I found it fascinating to look at the 30 or 40 or 50 year ago ads versus the current ads for e-cigarettes. You could probably say that that ad on the right is advertising tobacco use and smoking, even though it's for electronic cigarettes, which is not cigarette smoking. Very similar ads. The same things sell, basically. Even the same blue dress. It's like amazing. This is like 1940s, 50s, and this is 2012. You can see the difference. It's very little. It's the same product they're advertising. So there probably is a loophole there for tobacco companies to advertise even use of cigarettes through advertising electronic cigarettes, which I'll go into in a little bit. Although I probably won't get a chance. Just to say that I think, and this is a classic individual population argument, at individual level, electronic cigarettes are probably very effective at helping people stop smoking cigarettes, and they are far less impacting on your health, electronic cigarettes, where it doesn't combust, it heats the tobacco basically, and rather than combusting it, which most of the dangerous chemicals come from the burning of tobacco. So it probably is very effective, but it's at a population level, it renormalises tobacco use, it renormalises smoking. So a lot of the public health community worries a lot that smoking will again become normal, and the use of burned tobacco or combustible tobacco will also increase, or the decrease will stop. So it's very controversial. You'll get public health practitioners and physicians on either side of the argument. Probably, if you're an individual GP, I'd be saying, and I do, to people I see, try and get electronic cigarette, it'll help you stop smoking. But at population level, if I said that to my public health counterparts, physicians, they would probably kill me, because they're seen as normalising tobacco use again. They're very controversial right now. The same big suppliers of tobacco, the big tobacco, are going into the electronic cigarettes, and they're using that to also advertise their brand. Because it's legal in the UK, it's illegal here to advertise or sell electronic cigarettes in Australia, but in UK it's not. Other approaches to the end game is to remove the supply, so giving people smokers licences where you have to know the dangers, you have to pay a certain amount to use tobacco. Again, may not happen, but they're all interesting ideas. Progressively raising the age limit, having a smoke-free generation where everyone born after 2000, for example, can never smoke. That's coming up next year, I guess. They'll be 18. They could. So some countries have gone. I'm not sure they went ahead with that. New Zealand. They talked about it for a long time. Massive reductions in retail availability. You can limit where it's sold. Is it sold in your schools? Is it sold in areas where it's don't? Whatever. You can a whole lot of different approaches you can take. The product modification is worth touching on. Because this is where the US has moved just 2 weeks ago, mandating that you have to denicotinize cigarettes, so make it a minimal amount of nicotine. They were not a popular approach when cigarette use was widespread, but now it's only in a smaller group. If you do decrease nicotine content and make it non-addictive, you'll make it far easier for people to then quit, especially heavy smokers who are so addicted that to stop is really difficult. If you decrease the addictive component, then it will cause a massive decrease, I would think, in the prevalence of smoking. So watch that space. I'm sure the tobacco industry will fight it tooth and nail in the US, but the FDA, the food regulatory body in the US, has actually just brought that into. So they're going to go ahead with that and denicotinize cigarettes. Litigation, I think that tobacco companies should be held accountable for the massive death and destruction that they've caused. In some countries they have been. So American tobacco firms agreed to pay $200 billion in 1998. I can't believe these companies can pay $200 billion and still keep making profits. Just to show them the scale of their power and their sales. And there's been similar cases across the world where massive damages have been paid to governments who had to foot the bill, the health bill and the economic bill of the death and disability that tobacco has caused. Barriers to progress, I'll finish on this. There's an inherent attraction to smoking, so nicotine addiction is a big barrier to progress. Political addiction also to tobacco, less so now, but there's still political parties in Australia that receive tobacco donations. And other places like the US and places like India, big time, where the current work in tobacco control in India has been stalled largely because a lot of the politicians have a lot of vested interests in tobacco companies and are paid a lot by them. The philosophical objections have gone up before. I think, a voracious, mendacious, powerful industry who's prepared to lie. They lobby, they use their political muscle, they buy loyalty, they dispute the science or question the science, and they bring in lawsuits, which basically makes a regulatory freeze where other groups won't bring legislation in because, say, in Australia there's a High Court case, or in Australia there's a WTO case. So all these lawsuits that are brought in stop the rest of the world moving ahead in tobacco control. So Australia's just won all of its 5 or 6 major lawsuits that were brought against Australia for plain packaging. But that's taken 5-6 years. In the meantime, that's stopped other countries going ahead with plain packaging because they say, "I'll wait for the legal outcomes." These guys, the tobacco executives there, that was in the 1990s, all swore that tobacco was not addictive. before a US Congress, Congress inquiry, and I just thought, wow, gosh, how could they, I think they all know it's very addictive, that's where the profits come from, but you're fighting a pretty dirty industry. I think I was going to say, one of the last objective was what can we learn from the tobacco control movement? I think it has to be, any movement in other public health areas has to be comprehensive and multi-pronged. You can't just do one thing, you've got to do a whole lot of different things to change public attitudes and behaviours. You have to have multi-stakeholder engagement, you've got to find that common ground across political divides. You've got to bring society along with you if you want support for legislation that is going to be controversial. You need to be aware of industry engagement. They would focus typically on things that aren't effective, like voluntary codes of conducts, which is what industries love. Gambling industry is a classic one. They'll avoid anything that's effective, and they'll promote things that are very ineffective, like some TV ads saying gamble responsibly. Keep on gambling, it's good, just do it responsibly. They're very soft and not very effective when you look at the effect of that approach. Focusing on children, I think you saw before, works very effectively. Find champions. There's been a number of champions. So Nicola Roxon was one for plain packaging. Again, had a personal experience of someone in her family dying of tobacco use. I'm not sure for her father. As did the Honourable Minister of Victoria, who pushed it in the 1980s. I like to fight fire with fire. I think we've done that pretty well in tobacco, whether that be our approaches to advertising, targeting kids. It does work, and I think the industry will fight hard, and we can learn a lot from the way they've tried to promote a dangerous product. We can learn how to encourage people not to consume a dangerous product. I would finish there. There is one little video I'll show you which is funny. It goes for 1 minute, so if you have to leave, leave. But I think we've got 1 minute. Maybe it's not going to work. Who watches The Weekly here? There's a great episode in The Weekly which I find demonstrates the way industry fights. It only goes for 1 minute, but then I'll finish there. We've got 3 minutes. Is there any other questions while I get this up? You get another lecture, I think, later on in tobacco control in this module. So I think it's good you're having 2 lectures because, given it's one of the biggest killers in the world.
Australia, how do I say this politely? We have a problem. No, that's too judgmental.
You haven't got time to watch the whole
Wait, problem.
I'll go to starting point when I say.
Always on their bloody machine. According to the Medical Journal of Australia, the average Aussie kid sees up to 4,700 ads for junk food a year on TV alone. Some say, and stick with me on this, that if we want to discourage kids from eating junk food, then we should stop encouraging kids to eat junk food. But before you cry nanny state, the food industry agrees. Here's Kate Carnell, former head of the Australian Food and Grocery Council.
We have an industry code that has banned advertising of high fat, high sugar, high salt products to children.
In 2009, the industry created its own codes of conduct designed to reduce all forms of advertising to children of foods that don't represent healthier choices. So, how does it work?
Under Australia's self-regulatory codes, it's the food companies themselves that define what's healthy for children, according to criteria of their choosing.
That's right. Under the codes, food companies get to choose their own definition of a healthier option. And when your industry makes food like, I don't know, the 4 and 20 meat pie pizza, a pizza with 8 meat pies baked into the crust, a healthier option is literally anything that doesn't require CPR to finish it. Under this system, and this is true, Cocoa Pops count as a healthier option. Healthier, presumably, than just eating packets of sugar. Kit Kats and Smarties also make the list, and even though they are 38% sugar, Fruit Loops are considered a healthier option. Fruit Loops! Not even the word fruit contains fruit.
Just to make a point that the industry loves voluntary codes of conduct because they can set the laws and the rules that aren't very effective. And we've taken out all those loopholes for tobacco. The big challenges now is, big food, alcohol, gambling. How do you regulate these industries rather than them wanting to self-regulate themselves, which is not very effective. So hopefully a few more of you want to do public health now rather than going into medicine. You can do both. I do both. But if you have any questions, come and ask me after. It'd be great. Thank you.
Because we don't know much about it yet, and it hasn't been around much, so that's why the research hasn't been showing negative.
Haven't been around as much. Yeah, very recent. I think there may be negative effects. Yeah, some of the research has shown that there is negative effects, but it's not clear. Yeah. So there's some research showing that the vapor does cause some damage, but it's definitely not as damaging as tobacco smoke. It's burnt tobacco. It's not as damaging, but it may be.
We just don't know the risk.
We don't know the risk, and that's why the public health community is saying, well, we can't make it legal yet until we know. My microphone wasn't turned on, that's why I wasn't. We can't make it legal yet until we know for sure. So the public health community in Australia is saying caution, caution, caution. But I think the public health community in the UK is saying it's very unlikely to be as dangerous as tobacco smoke from combustion, so we're going to legalise it.
So is it kind of a misconception then from the public health level? Because like most of my friends are like, oh, why don't you just switch to e-cigarettes?
Do you smoke or?
Not me knowing.
Yeah.
Like they speak to other friends who smoke, like their parents be like, oh, why don't you switch to e-cigarettes?
Yep.
It's a healthier option. And for a while I did consider it because I think there's like I'm not sure how it works, but the vapor does taste good.
Yeah, it does.
Like shishas are.
Yeah. No, it is far more effective. I think off the record, I would say that it's far more. I'm going to stop that recording now. Anyway. Press here to pause recording. Progress. Stop recording. Hang up the stop. I guess I press stop. Yeah. Close down. Yeah, no, you're right. I think that the tobacco control community is going to regret not legalising electronic cigarettes in Australia. So my personal opinion is that in 50 years' time,
they didn't fight hard enough.
They're preventing it now, and the UK, other places have gone ahead and made it legal. US. I think Australia's going to look back in 50 years' time and say we made a mistake because we could have increased the decrease of prevalence of smoking of combustible cigarettes much more dramatically if we'd allowed e-cigarettes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's my personal opinion. So I think we're going the wrong way. But history will tell. It's really hard to know.
Okay.
So the leading person in Australia in behavioural sciences and smoking is Ron Borland, and he's in favour of e-cigarettes for those reasons, and he reckons we'll be looked back on as having caused death.
For banning e-cigarettes?
Not for banning e-cigarettes, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. So, do I shut this down? So, where other people like Simon Chapman and so on, they are vehemently against e-cigarettes and think they're going to normalise smoking again. And by normalising smoking, do you increase people who are smoking? So, don't know. It's really difficult to get a. Do I just press? Oh, it's really difficult to know. What the right answer is. Ron Borland would say that the people that use e-cigarettes don't then migrate back to using cigarettes. So if you start as a teenager using e-cigarettes, it's unlikely that you'll migrate to using smoked cigarettes. That's the unknown bit, but he says behavioural science is showing now it's not a bridging product to smoking. It's something that people use separately, quite differently, distinctly. But you can see from those ads and so on, the dangers is that the companies use it to advertise both forms. So there is a very real risk at the population level that increases, normalises smoking, and you get more people across the population smoking. But I think at an individual level, like you're saying for yourself or a friend, I'd be saying, I do in my office. Someone smokes in my office, and I said, he's trying to quit. I said, you've got to use e-cigarettes. It's a much better option. Nicotine, you still get the nicotine fix. You don't get the danger of tobacco. You want to quit, it's a good, and the tar, the danger of burnt tobacco. So I think it's the way to go if you're individual level. So GP working in a practice, I'd be saying my patients who smoke try e-cigarettes. As a public health position, the population, I would say there's a lot of dangers of that normalising.